When deciding on the video game to discuss for this project, I wanted to utilize one that both included as many of the learned elements as possible and one that I had the most knowledge of. So for me, the one that made the most sense then was Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Developed by Ubisoft Montreal and released on November 10th, 2020, Valhalla follows the story of Eivor, a Viking raider which the player can choose to make male or female. I chose female, this is my character here, who makes her way through European countries of old to protect her clan by making alliances. Yet, what makes this game truly fascinating is that Eivor and her world are all part of a simulation, which ties this game into an even larger narrative that stretches through all the Assassin's Creed games.
Valhalla truly is a prime example of interactive storytelling that leverages narrative and agency to create an experience that has the potential to be different for every player. Essentially, everything you see here can be gone to in whatever order the player chooses.
Classified as an action role playing game, the general story structure is one which Jesse Shell would actually probably call problematic. It's a combinational explosion that presents the player with several instances where choice is meaningful, but ultimately ends in one of two ways. Either Ivor betrays her brother Sigurd, or she doesn't.
The game structure is set up to be open world, where the player is free to traverse where they want to. What you'll see there on the screen now are 6 regions that you can visit in the game, all with their own unique map, unique things to do within them. Most of these are part of DLC, like Ireland, Finland, and Francia, but a lot of them are built in the game too. England and Norway are the biggest ones. Now, a player can choose to follow that main storyline. You'll see at the top of the screen there's like a little triangle thing that shows you the mission marker, or do any one of the multitude of things that are on the screen right now, from collecting wealth via armor or skill books, to collecting opals, which are just used to upgrade things, to get collecting artifacts, which you turn in later. So really, I mean, it's up to you. If you can walk there or get there, climb there, then you can do it. So along with the agency that a player has to complete storyline or side missions, essentially in whatever order they wish, with some exceptions, there's also the opportunity to face enemies at whatever time you choose to. So this grouping right here, this is a group of enemies that's part of an order. Now, these larger ones, the game will make you kind of complete in a certain order because they're like the big bosses. But their little henchmen essentially work as clues to get you to the big boss. So those can be done either before or after defeating the big boss. Now, along with this, though, there are meaningful choices that the player is given that will affect the way that these enemies interact with the player. So one example of that would be there's a mission in this game called Heavy is the Head. At the end of that mission, you have the opportunity to spare or kill an enemy by the name of Leofrith. Now, if you decide to spare Leofrith, he will then prompt another mission. Now, that mission then gives you another choice where you can choose to track down a scroll that's been left on an altar that's essentially going to tell these zealots right here who you are, where you are, and is going to make these characters actively chase you when you come into their vicinity on a map. Now, if you go and destroy that scroll before they get your name, so before the next game day, then these characters will not chase you, and you're kind of given a little more freedom to walk past them and around them. And that becomes important when you look at them, their levels begin to get higher. So you don't always want these things chasing you. Now, even though there is that degree of agency and kind of choice to do things in the way that you choose, just as Miller discusses, there's got to be some degree of linearity. So even while giving the player the illusion of free choice, there needs to be something that's going to keep them on the rail. So you don't want them to be totally pulled out of the story, or they forget what's happening, or They can't follow it. So the way that this game does that is by equating areas, missions, players, characters, enemies, whatever it may be, with a power level.
I want to see the Alliance map.
So one of the main storylines is that Eivor needs to go around and kind of collect all of these places to be a part of her alliance, to help support them. So anything that has a raven, I'm the Raven clan, so those are places that I've already been to. This sword is the one that I pledged to, the one I'm working on, and these little kind of men are the ones that are available. So what you'll see here is, you know, this area, this one that's available, that's got a power level of 250. So if I'm a player and I'm level 10, I'm not necessarily going to want to choose the area that's 250. That's not going to be fun. I'm going to get absolutely destroyed in most cases. I mean, me, I'm not that great, so I absolutely would. And it also has these places where this one's not even available. So even if I wanted to go there right now, I can't. And that's because that's dependent on another part of the story. So again, there'll be 2 or 3 places open at a time. You'll see here, I can choose one or the other, but essentially it's the game corralling me into a choice. Now, the same can be said for the missions.
I've changed my mind.
We'll get into here once we leave her.
I should go.
So the same idea with these quests, you'll see that they've got power levels attached to them. So anything in this area, this is going to be a power level of 20. That's going to be super simple for where I'm at. You'll see all these green ones are ones that are well within where my power level is. So the game inadvertently pushes the player into these certain directions in what Salen and Zimmerman would describe as designed interactivity, since these interactions between the player and either the missions or their enemies are based on the rules governing the power levels, which have been put into place by the developers themselves. Well, the interactions of Valhalla lean heavily into 2 of Salen and Zimmerman's modes of interactivity, Mode 2 and Mode 3, which arguably are the most general of the modes. For Mode 2, functional interactivity, this is shown in the interface aspects that are not part of play but do impact it. So things like this skill tree here, where the player can decide what they want to put their points into. That's going to affect how the game is played, how easy certain things are for them. It's going to affect if they align themselves with a raven, which tends to have what you see their assassination, evasion, health, or maybe they would rather be a wolf, they like to play more ranged, or perhaps they're a berserker, they want to melee and get into that. So these are functions, but not technically a part of play. Another one that would showcase that is the armor selection. So same idea, the armor itself, it's a function of the game, but it's not explicitly part of play. So depending on what I decide to choose, whether that be, again, berserker or raven or wolf, whatever that is, each armor set has its own set of perks, and there's runes that you can attach to them on top of that. But again, not part of the actual gameplay, but it does impact that gameplay. And then for Mode 3, which is the explicit interactivity, the best way to kind of show that is through the assignment of tasks. So these are things that the game wants you to play. They're explicitly giving you these missions to uphold to. So that can be the main storyline, it can be, side mission, any one of these things. That's explicitly things that the game wants you to be a part of. Now, coupled with this, it shows how the general play kind of follows a basic model of task, selection, travel, complete. Now, this holds true for everything from the missions to obtaining ingredients, collecting items, which is also expressive of Salen and Zimmerman's concept of micro interactions, which go into macro interactions, and the two of them being intertwined with each other. So say I'm on the map and I decide that I want to go get an opal. I would travel here and make my way over to this opal, collect the opal, and then these opals actually get turned in for upgrades to armors and things like that. So that would be, the collection of the opal is the micro interaction. Turning it in is the macro interaction, which itself also feeds into a larger macro interaction, which is using that armor for the game itself. Kind of explicit show of these micro interactions feeding into the larger macro interaction, and the two of them working in between each other would be back at this order tree again, where the player decides to go after, whatever little enemy they want. And depending on which enemy they go after, you obtain a clue to the larger enemy. So, I mean, you could theoretically just go after the large enemy, whether you found the clues or not. You don't necessarily have to defeat these little ones, but they help you get to the big one. But the same idea, they feed into each other. And then no matter what, these enemies have to be faced before you're going to find the big dude, the head honcho of the order. So it's a larger experience that ties into an even bigger macro interaction as these interactions feed into the storyline as well, which in this instance, these storylines that are tied to these orders actually stretch across all Assassin's Creed games. This is the one kind of tying thing is this order itself. So even outside of the game, this is a macro interaction on a larger scale. Part of Valhalla's narrative is the concept of morality. Now, this plays out in the agency that's provided to the player via their actions, including gameplay, events, and or dialogue choices. The example I spoke of earlier with choosing to spare or kill the enemy Leofrith, that's one example. In that example, the player decides between Viking morality, that is showing respect to an opposing warrior via death and battle, or the more modern morality of being the bigger person. Now, another example would be Ivor choosing to sleep with Sigurd's wife, Randvi, which is what you see here. That's what I chose to do in my storyline. Now, in this instance, again, Viking morality is the idea that infidelity is part of a warrior's existence. So when we're away, when we're apart from our spouses, it was kind of the thing that happened, when men are away at war. Or modern notions of fidelity and loyalty, which actually in this case does tie a little bit back into that, because once Sigurd finds out, it's detrimental to Eivor in this instance.
The many moral choices are shadows of the larger narrative, which also follows a story arc themed on morality as well. Act 1 establishes Eivor and Sigurd's relationship, which is a deep bond based on admiration and shared trauma. Act 2 takes up the bulk of the narrative, which includes Eivor following Sigurd to new land and acting as his vassal by forging the alliances. And it's there that the player agency begins to shape the narrative, with each mini decision shaping Eivor's overall morality. Act 3 then is where the results of those decisions bear fruit and the ultimate confrontation of morality occurs. Either Eivor has followed the path of loyalty, supporting Sigurd in every decision, or she's chosen to follow her own ideas of what is right, which leads her on a path that ends with her betraying the person she holds most dear.
Outside of the conversations and the character interactions, which are classified by Sebastian Domsch as actively nodal forms of narration, are those which add additional context to the overall narrative of the setting, the overall world, which Domsch refers to as passive forms of narration. Now, this includes things like journal entries by way of finding these little collectible things around the world that kind of give you bits and pieces of a deeper narrative, a larger story. And you see there's several of them. Sometimes they'll be to a mission, sometimes it's just kind of like context for what you're trying to get to. And also things like the codex here, which in this database actually gives you information about the regions that you can travel to, specific locations. It'll give you information about the people that you come in contact with. Like here, this is Sigurd. This is your sworn brother in the game. Things like that. Um, and then on top of that, there's also cutscenes in between the missions and things like that that are going to provide narration that's important to the specific event that you're dealing with or the overall story in general.
While playing Valhalla, it feels like Chris Crawford's idea of a constitutional democracy between the player and the creators. There's just enough freedom and customization to make the game feel unique to the player, but not so much that the creator loses all control. Part of that freedom is due to the fact that the game was developed into what Marcello Picucci describes as a discovery narrative. The more the player explores, the more of the story they get, and thus the more immersive it feels. That pretty much guarantees every player is going to be able to find something fun about the game or its story. I will say, though, that this is heavily dependent on if a player stays away from the extra DLC storylines before they've got a grasp on those which are built into the main game. By not doing so, it can quickly feel somewhat overwhelming trying to keep track of so many narratives at once, which could lead to a player walking away. That would be a real shame because they would miss out on arguably one of the best Assassin's Creed games Ubisoft has ever made.